Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. This time we're tackling something a lot of you have been asking about, mental health.
Definitely a hot topic, and for good reason. Seems like everyone's looking for ways to feel better these days.
No kidding. You guys sent in some really interesting articles for us to dig into. One from Medline Plus, that's a U.S. government website, by the way, and another from the Mental Health Foundation, which is based in the U.K. I gotta say, some of this research is pretty eye-opening.
It is, and I was actually surprised by some of the connections we found between these two sources, coming from opposite sides of the Atlantic and all.
Yeah, you'd think the advice would be pretty much the same, right? But there are definitely some nuances. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's start with the basics. How do these sources even define mental health? What are we actually talking about here? Well, Medline Plus takes a pretty broad approach. They say it's not just about feeling happy or sad, it's about your overall well-being. Not just emotional and psychological, but social well-being too.
Okay, so it's bigger than just what's going on in our heads.
Exactly. It's about how we connect with others, how we handle stress, basically how we navigate the world around us.
That makes a lot of sense. And this isn't just for people who are struggling, right? I mean, Medline Plus is pretty clear that mental health is important at every stage of life.
Absolutely.
Huh.
It's not like you hit a certain age and you've got it all figured out. It's an ongoing process for everyone, no matter where you're at.
So then where do we even begin? I mean, there are tons of tips out there. It can get overwhelming. What's the best way to approach all this information?
Yeah, no doubt. But what I really appreciate about these sources is that they offer practical advice, stuff you can actually use in your everyday life,
Hmm.
not just vague concepts, but actionable steps.
Okay, perfect. So let's dive into some of the highlights, shall we? One thing that jumped out at me was that both sources talk about the link between physical and mental health.
Oh, for sure. They both emphasize that taking care of your body can have a huge impact on your mind. Medline Plus even goes into how nutrition can actually play a role in mental illness.
Hold on, really? Like what you eat can affect things like depression and anxiety.
You bet. They mentioned this study about vitamin B12 deficiency and its connection to depression. Pretty interesting stuff. Definitely makes you think twice about what you're putting in your body.
For sure, I'm already reevaluating my grocery list. Another tip that both sources brought up was the importance of connecting with others.
Right. It's funny how something so simple can be so powerful. But the Mental Health Foundation actually takes it a step further. They talk about the benefits of being kind to others.
Oh, okay, yeah, makes sense. But what's in it for me?
Well, get this. Research shows that acts of kindness can actually boost your mood, too, not just the person you're helping. So it's a win-win situation.
So, being kind is basically self-care. I like that. All right, so we've covered some common ground here. What about some of the unique insights each source offers? What sets them apart?
Well, Medline Plus had a really interesting point about developing a sense of meaning and purpose.
Like finding something that gives your life value. That's pretty deep stuff.
It is, but it doesn't have to be some grand ambition or anything. It could be your job, volunteering, a hobby, really anything that makes you feel like you're contributing something positive to the world.
I think we could all use a little more of that these days. What else stood out to you from Medline Plus?
They also talked about developing coping skills, which are basically techniques for handling stressful situations. They even listed a whole bunch of different methods you can try, everything from deep breathing to progressive relaxation.
Progressive relaxation. What's that?
It's where you tense and relax different muscle groups in your body systematically. It can be really helpful for people who hold a lot of tension, especially if you combine it with mental imagery or breathing exercises.
Interesting. I could see how that would be useful for calming down when things get overwhelming. Okay, so we've got Medline Plus covered. What about the Mental Health Foundation? What did they bring to the table?
One thing that really caught my eye was their emphasis on getting closer to nature. They even mentioned this thing called forest bathing, which sounds incredibly relaxing.
Forest bathing. I've never heard of that.
It's basically immersing yourself in the sights, sounds, and smells of a forest. Apparently, there's research showing it can lower stress hormones and boost your mood.
Wow, I can see why they call it bathing. It's like soaking your senses in nature. So we're all supposed to be hiking through the woods now.
Well, not necessarily.
Hmm.
Even if you live in a city, there are still ways to incorporate nature into your life. Visit a park, tend a garden, even just adding some plants to your home can make a difference.
That's a good point. Even small doses of nature can probably have a positive effect. Anything else from the Mental Health Foundation that we should know about?
Yeah, one more thing that I found particularly interesting is that they dedicated a whole section to the connection between money and mental health.
Really? You don't hear about that very often.
I know, right? But it makes sense. Financial stress can be a huge burden, and it often gets swept under the rug.
So, what do they suggest? What can people do about it?
Well, first and foremost, they stress that you're not alone if you're struggling. Financial worries are incredibly common, and there's no shame in seeking help. They also talk about the importance of understanding how money affects your mental well-being.
You mean like recognizing that financial stress can lead to feelings of isolation and overwhelm?
Exactly. Once you're aware of that connection, you can start to take steps to manage your finances and get support if you need it.
Wow, that's some seriously valuable information. And we're just scratching the surface here. Stay tuned because in part 2, we'll uncover even more practical tips and insights from these sources.
You won't want to miss it.
And we're back, diving deeper into these awesome mental health tips you guys sent us. I gotta say, some of this stuff is really making me rethink how I approach, like, my own well-being.
Me too, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much research is out there. But so many of these strategies are, surprisingly simple.
Right. It's not all about therapy and medication. Like, there's actually a lot we can do on our own. Speaking of which, the Mental Health Foundation had this great tip about planning things to look forward to.
Oh yeah, the power of anticipation.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds almost too easy, but there's some real psychology behind it. Having something exciting on the horizon.
I know. Sometimes I catch myself feeling down, like, what's the point? But then if I've got like a trip coming up or even just dinner with friends, it gives me something to be excited about, makes a difference.
Totally. In the Mental Health Foundation, they actually say that intentionally planning these enjoyable events can, increase our sense of hope, which is
Yeah.
a huge factor in overall well-being.
So it's not just about like distracting ourselves from the bad stuff. It's more about actively cultivating positive emotions.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy either. Could be a movie night, trying a new recipe, even just scheduling in some downtime to chill. It's about being intentional about, your happiness.
I love that, like taking control instead of letting it control you. Okay, so we got to plan fun stuff. What else does the Mental Health Foundation suggest?
Well, they talk about learning to understand and manage your feelings, not just trying to ignore them or push them away, but actually getting to know them.
Okay, so no more bottling things up. Got it. But how do you manage feelings like they don't come with instructions?
Right. It's a process.
Mhm.
The Mental Health Foundation suggests a few strategies. One is just naming your feelings. Instead of I feel bad, get specific. Are you anxious, frustrated, disappointed?
Huh, interesting. So it's about being more in touch with what I'm actually like experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. And they say that just naming those emotions can help you gain some control over them.
That kind of makes sense. Like once you identify the beast, you can start to tame it. Any other techniques for managing those trickier feelings?
They also talk about talking kindly to yourself.
Okay, now this is where I get a little skeptical. I mean, how much can a pep talk really help when you're dealing with like serious stuff?
I hear you, it can sound a bit cheesy. But think about it. We all have that inner critic, right? That voice that says we're not good enough, smart enough, whatever enough. And that voice can be really damaging.
Oh, tell me about it. Mine's on repeat.
Right. So the idea is to challenge those negative thoughts with more positive, supportive ones. Treat yourself with the same compassion you would a friend.
Okay, I can see how that could be helpful. It's like retraining your brain to focus on the good stuff instead of getting bogged down in the bad. So self-compassion, check. What else?
Well, both sources actually highlight this classic but crucial tip, talking to someone you trust for support.
I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? If you're struggling, reach out.
It sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how many people suffer in silence. The Mental Health Foundation emphasizes that talking to someone can help you feel less alone, more connected.
And isn't that what we all want? That feeling of belonging, being understood.
Absolutely, it's a basic human need. And even if the person you talk to doesn't have all the answers, just voicing your feelings out loud can be, incredibly cathartic.
For sure. Sometimes just getting it off your chest makes a huge difference. Okay, this next topic might be a little heavier, but it's something the Mental Health Foundation brought up, and I think it's really important. Using drugs and alcohol to cope.
Definitely a sensitive topic, but it's so crucial to address. Substance abuse can, really wreak havoc on mental health.
And it's that vicious cycle, right? You're feeling down, so you reach for something to numb the pain, which only makes things worse in the long run.
Exactly. But it's so important to remember that addiction is a treatable condition. There's no shame in seeking help.
Absolutely. There are so many resources available, support groups, treatment centers. It's all about taking that first step. Okay, now before we move on, one more tip from the Mental Health Foundation I want to touch on. It's about making the most of your money and getting help with debt.
It's crazy how much our financial situation can impact our mental well-being. The source even highlights the link between financial worries and like feeling isolated and overwhelmed.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. When I'm stressed about money, it's like everything else just feels amplified.
For sure. But the good news is there are things you can do to take control. The Mental Health Foundation suggests creating a budget, tracking your spending, and seeking out free financial advice from reputable organizations.
So it's about being proactive and seeking support when you need it.
Exactly. And remember, financial health is just one piece of the puzzle. We've covered so much in this deep dive, but it all comes down to taking care of yourself in a holistic way.
All right, welcome back. So we've uncovered some really insightful tips for improving mental health, and now it's time to bring it all home, tie it all together. What are some of the biggest takeaways you've gotten from these sources?
Well, one thing that really struck me was this idea that mental health isn't a destination, it's more like a journey. Both sources really emphasize it's an ongoing process, not something you just like achieve overnight and you're done.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in this idea of fixing our mental health, but it's more about, making sustainable changes and learning to navigate those ups and downs.
Exactly. And that includes being kind to ourselves along the way. We're not going to be perfect all the time.
Right. So no more beating ourselves up when we, have a bad day or make a mistake.
Exactly. The Mental Health Foundation, they talk a lot about self-compassion, basically treating yourself with the same understanding and care that you would offer a friend.
Yeah, I think we could all use a little more of that. Something else that really resonated with me was just how interconnected everything is. These sources highlight how our mental health is affected by our physical health, relationships, finances, even our environment.
It's a holistic picture, isn't it? You can't just focus on one area and expect everything else to just fall into place.
Nope, it's like trying to bake a cake with only one ingredient. It's just not going to work.
Right. And speaking of connections, both sources really emphasize the importance of social connection, whether it's spending time with, loved ones, joining a group, even striking up a conversation with a stranger. Those human interactions can make a big difference.
Yeah, I always feel so much better after spending time with friends or family, even if we're just hanging out watching a movie. It's that sense of belonging, that
Right.
shared experience. It really lifts my mood.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be anything like super planned or elaborate. Even small gestures like smiling at someone on the street, offering a compliment, it can create this ripple effect of positivity.
It's funny how those small things can have such a big impact. Speaking of small things, one tip that really stuck with me from the Mental Health Foundation was the power of kindness.
Well, that's a good one. And it goes beyond just being kind to others, right? It's
Mm.
about being kind to ourselves too.
Right. So next time I'm, feeling down on myself, maybe instead of criticizing, I should try talking to myself the way I would talk to a friend.
Exactly. Give yourself that same grace and understanding that you'd offer someone you care about.
It's so easy to be our own worst critics, isn't it? But I guess all this information is useless if we don't actually, put it into practice. What's one small step you think people can take, today, to improve their mental health?
Hmm. That's a great question. After reading through all this, I'm kind of inspired to try that forest bathing thing. I think finding even just 15 minutes to be present in nature could make a world of difference.
You know what? I might have to join you on that one. And for those of us who can't escape to the woods, even something as simple as starting a gratitude journal or practicing deep breathing for a few minutes each day, that can be a great starting point.
For sure. It's all about finding what works for you and making those small but consistent efforts.
Well, this has been an incredibly enlightening deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much. I'm excited to put some of these strategies into action.
Me too. It's a good reminder that we all have the power to, take control of our mental well-being.
Absolutely. So, to everyone listening, remember you're not alone on this journey. There are resources available, and even those small changes can make a big difference.
And most importantly, be kind to yourselves along the way.
That's a wrap on the deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another insightful exploration. Until then, take care.